This is The Behavioral Divide, brought to you by Avantis Investors, where we bring together both academic research and real-world financial advice to uncover insights that may help us make better financial decisions. I am Jeremy Thornton with Avantis, back with our host, Professor Hal Hershfield. And Hal, this turned out to be a very interesting conversation, one that really gets into, hey, what are these we'll call it gurus of personal finance. You know, we all can think of the big names that are out there, the books that you can find in the airport, or if folks still walk into Barnes and Noble, you can see all these books. They're everywhere. Many of them are really famous. And we're kind of going head to head. What do these guys have to say versus the finance professors? So it ended up being a really interesting conversation. Hal, I'll let you introduce our guest and just talk about kind of your key takeaways.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. So today we had James Choi. He's a professor of finance at the Yale School of Management. James did this fantastic and fantastically interesting paper called Popular Personal Financial Advice versus the Professors, which I love because it makes it feel like this, sharks and jets type of interaction between the gurus and the professors. He read the 50 most popular personal finance books and compared the advice that you could find in those to what we know from the academic world, and found some real, disconnects there. So we dug into where those disconnects exist, what they mean for what clients and consumers absorb, and then, what advisors might actually be able to take from both the academic side and the personal finance guru side and say, okay, here's what's actually happening there. To me, one of the big things that popped out is the recognition that clients could actually be taking on more risk than they're taking on. That's an academic insight that a lot of the gurus don't get, and I think hasn't necessarily made its way over to the advisor community. There's a lot more insights there, but that's just one of the big ones for me.
Yeah, I came into this thinking, what would be interesting about this for financial advisors is that, hey, your clients or your prospective clients, the prospects that they're hoping to be clients in the future, they could be reading all these books from the Dave Ramseys of the world, or the Rich Dad, Poor Dad book. And there's all these books that are out there that so many people have read. And so it might be really interesting to just know, without having to go read all of these books, what are the key things that they're telling people, and that your clients may come in with that kind of mindset in. So I thought that would be a really good sort of awareness campaign to present to people. But what really struck me was the point that you brought up of really, the element that seems to be so important from Professor Choi that's missing in both the guru's world, but also from many financial advisors, is the importance of human capital and the role that plays. Human capital being our future earnings, the money that we expect to receive in the future as we continue to work, the role that should play in asset allocation. That was the big thing that Professor Choi hit on. And I think that's super interesting. I think advisors are really going to find value in hearing that.
Yeah. All right, let's go to the episode.
Yeah, let's do it.
The idea for this episode partly came from seeing James Choi present this work and getting to know this work that's really cool, but also from the observation that so often we have advisors out there who are talking to clients. Clients are getting not just advice from advisors, but from popular books out there, not to mention other sources as well. And one of the questions that arises is, where do the finance gurus get it right? Where do they get it wrong? And how does the advice that's given in these books differ from what we know from the academic world? So James, I'm so excited to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for being here.
A pleasure to be here.
I know you did this really cool project where you essentially, read these books and compared the advice that comes from the finance gurus and the finance professors and the econ professors. Let's take a step back for a second. Tell me a little bit about how this project came about to begin with, and then we'll sort of get into the weeds.
Well, the genesis of the project really was 6 years ago. I started teaching a personal finance course at Yale for the students here, and I wanted to make it a different kind of personal finance course, so not just basic financial literacy, but really a course that brought the best of our economic science to questions about optimal personal financial management. And so in the course of putting together the course, I was looking for textbooks, readings, and so on. And so, of course, it was natural to look at the popular books that are out there because this is an enormous industry of kind of personal finance gurus out there writing these kinds of books. And it was just interesting that a lot of what I was reading in these books was not really aligning with the message that I wanted to send in my own materials. And that was, kind of the genesis of the project. But then when I had some time over the next few years, I wanted to be a little bit more systematic about understanding what are the differences between what is just out there organically in the publishing world in kind of thought space versus what we were teaching in our ivory tower settings.
I love the genesis for that. I think it's just such a great, it's just a great question that you can really chew on there. And so, I mean, one of the things I'm curious about is on a high level, what were some of the biggest differences that popped out for you in terms of those distinctions between what the popular books say and what I'll say what the professors say.
I think the biggest difference, obviously there are many, many differences, and I think that there are certain areas where the popular authors are just wrong because they have some misconceptions about basic economic facts. But I think that the biggest differences really are on kind of the philosophy of how we can get ourselves to execute on plans. And so the basic paradigm in economics, in academia, is you decide you're going to do something and then you do it. And so there's not really much of a gap between intention and action. And I think that some of the advice that the popular authors were giving that really differed from the academic advice were premised on the notion that you need to do these things in order to get yourself to behave, in order for you to be able to stick to a plan. And I think that the most salient example of this is savings rates over the life cycle. Economists would say that you should kind of keep your consumption level, your spending level, relatively constant over time, because it just is harder to live if you are really deprived in one year and then you're overly flush in the next year. And so we would say, smooth your consumption out over time. Well, in your 20s, your income is fairly low relative to kind of your overall lifetime resources. And so that would mean that you would not save very much or even go into debt in your 20s. And then you really become a super saver in your 40s and 50s when you're in your peak earnings years. So that's kind of the consumption smoothing view of the world. Most of the popular authors rather advocate for a savings rate smoothing over time, where they say you should be saving 10 to 15% of your income consistently, even in your 20s, even if it's kind of really hard, even if you're going through a lean spell, maybe even an unemployment spell. And the motivation for that is the notion that if the first time you ever try to live beneath your means and save some of your paycheck is in your 40s, you're just not going to be able to do that. And so you need to build this discipline over time through the practice of it, of consistently putting away some of your paycheck into savings.
I mean, look, I come from the behavioral side, and like on this one, I've got to side with the personal finance gurus, right? Like because I think I'm trying to pay attention to the behavioral side. I recognize that there are gaps between intention and action, and I'm not trying to like stir the pot too much here, but I'm curious if you've, since reading that and teaching the class, like, do you have a perspective there, or do you just see these as these are just different perspectives? And obviously this is, anything we talk about here has to be recognized that it applies in nuanced ways to individuals, and that sometimes it could be that the advice from the finance gurus is better for some type of people and the advice from the professors is better for some other types of people. But I'm curious what your take on that particular distinction is, because I think it's one of the really interesting ones that you've uncovered.
I actually have quite a bit of sympathy to the popular author's perspective.
Okay.
Now, I think the weakness is that we actually have no evidence that I'm aware of that savings is a discipline that is improved by the practice of it. It seems kind of intuitive, but
yeah,
I mean, to even test that, this design of that study it's hard to know how to run that study in any kind of
How would you
ethical
even do
way.
that? Yep.
Uh, but I think if I had a kid in his 20s, I would be a little uncomfortable, or yes, uncomfortable telling him, yeah,
Don't change.
rack up that credit card debt. Don't worry about it. You'll pay it off in your 30s and 40s. Yeah,
Yeah.
that does strike me as kind of a hard way to live. And certainly, if I look at my own example, so, I spent 5 years as a PhD student with a relatively meager income during those years. And I did save a little bit of money during
Yeah.
those years. But
Yeah.
the economic model would say, no, that was uh, idiotic. You should have
Yeah.
spent a lot more as a PhD student because you were going to make a lot more money once you finish the PhD and become a professor. So I
I
have
mean,
sympathy for it.
yeah, I mean, and like to be fair, I think some of that my sense is that that consumption smoothing model possibly comes from an antiquated period of time where there was, and I could be wrong about this, less uncertainty about the future. I mean, right now, I would say to anybody, like, there's so much development happening in the world. We don't know what your future stream of income is going to look like. So you might as well not only save now for the sake of starting a habit, but save now for the sake of having some income later on. But I mean, maybe I'm oversimplifying to say that that's an antiquated model there. I don't know.
I mean, I think if you had uncertainty, certainly that does create motives in the economic model for some precautionary savings. I am not certain that there is more uncertainty now than there used to be. I think that that's contested. But yeah, certainly all of us have
Yeah.
uncertainty. And I think that just from a psychological well-being perspective, there is
Yeah.
survey evidence that looks at how much time and energy people spend on worrying about their finances, and the amount of worry and stress that people experience sharply increases as the amount of financial cushion that they have decreases.
Yeah.
And so I think there is something about just freeing up energy to kind of pursue your life goals, that having a bit of financial cushion
Yeah.
really is helpful for.
I think that's a great insight. Okay, let's take this, some of what you've uncovered, and I'd love if we can to apply it a little bit more to the world of wealth management, financial advisors. Let's see if we can start with the academic side, James. And I'm curious what you think some of the bigger insights from academia are that maybe aren't picked up as much as you would like them to be or expect them to be from the advisor side. I recognize that's a difficult question because I know you didn't survey advisors per se. You looked at the gap between the gurus and the professors, and now I'm adding a third rung in here. But given what you know about this space, and I know that you're well ensconced in the academic world and talk a lot to people that are not in the academic world. I'm curious what you think about this particular gap here.
Well, I think that the biggest gap has to do with asset allocation. And I
Okay.
think that most advice that's out there, professional or otherwise, is way too conservative on the asset allocation. And the
Okay.
reason is that a lot of this advice that's out there does not take into account the biggest economic asset that most working people have, which is their human capital. In other words, the future stream of wage income and Social Security benefits, retirement benefits that they have coming to them.
Okay.
And kind of the thing to realize here is that innovations or shocks to your labor income, shocks to your Social Security benefits, these are fairly uncorrelated with the stock market's return. And so what that
Okay.
ends up implying is that this is like an enormous fixed income position. It's an enormous bond that you have in your kind of total wealth portfolio. And that means that you can afford to take actually quite a bit of risk in your financial portfolio because you have this enormous human capital stock that is going to provide a cushion for you if things don't go so well for you in your financial portfolio. And so a lot of this kind of the standard economic models that incorporate human capital would say that you should be like at least 100% stocks for much of your working life. And this is not a new insight at all. This goes back
Yeah.
to Robert Merton's paper in 1971.
Yeah.
So this is something that's been around for a long time, but it just hasn't filtered out into the practitioner community.
But and what do you think the reason is? I mean, that paper is over half a century old, right? Like,
Yeah.
what's the disconnect there? Do you think there's knowledge about it and yet hesitancy to implement it because advisors know that clients can be, risk averse at times, or is it that those insights haven't just even filtered over to the advisor practitioner community?
I think that it has not filtered over so much to the practitioner community, but I think that's because the way the insight was kind of derived in the first place made it feel not so applicable. So here's what I mean by that.
Okay.
Uh, so Bob Merton proved this beautiful theorem back in 1971, but for a very special case where your labor income is risk-free. So obviously, our labor income is not risk-free. Even for tenured professors, our labor income is not exactly risk-free.
Right.
And so it could feel a little bit like an academic curiosity. Now, what ended up happening was that in 2005, there was another paper that came out that showed that even when your labor income is risky, but the shocks to it are relatively uncorrelated with the stock market, your human capital still acts like an enormous bond in your overall wealth portfolio insofar as the effect that it has on your optimal financial portfolio allocation behaves. But the authors of that paper and the subsequent kind of academic community didn't really take that insight and make it something that was usable by kind of practitioners. So what the 2005 paper authors did, this is Kako, Gomes, and Manhout.
Okay.
They kind of had a numerical solution. So they showed some nice graphs for a particular set of parameters. But then you look at that paper and say, well, those are not my parameters. I have different preferences. I have different kind of labor income riskiness and so on. And so how am I going to adapt that to my setting? And the answer was basically, you got to write your own Fortran program and kind of run this code yourself for your own parameters. Nobody's going to do that. Not even economists do that.
Yep.
And so it became kind of this very well-cited paper within academia, but it was not really kind of actionable for anybody outside, and even for academics. It wasn't really actionable. It was just something to cite.
Yeah.
So I think that that was part of the reason that that transmission of knowledge never made its way out into the practitioner community. And I have a new paper that is trying to bridge that gap by kind of providing some approximations to those solutions that were developed by Kako, Gomes, and Manhout, where you can actually compute the solutions in Excel. So something really simple, not this complicated Fortran program.
Thanks for doing that work, because I think that's, that you are really sort of taking, let's make it something that's not just an interesting insight that academics can cite, but let's make it practical. I love that. All right, I want to flip it around and sort of go from the other perspective here. What do you think some of the insights are from the popular finance gurus that advisors could more readily attend to or adopt, if there are some?
I kind of think the advisors are probably pretty plugged in to, I think it's a similar stream of thinking that produces both the popular advice and what the advisors are giving. I mean, I thought what you were about to ask is, what can academics learn from the popular authors?
I was going to go there too, but, answer it either way.
Yeah, well, kind of going back to this 100% stocks recommendation, one thing that the popular authors talk about, which is related to what I was talking about before with kind of the savings rates that are kind of implementable. How do you get yourself to implement certain savings rates over your life? A bunch of these authors say, you don't really know your risk tolerance until you have been in a bear market. And you might think you have a high risk tolerance, but you don't. And so this is a reason why they say you can't really handle 100% stocks. So our academic models might say 100% stocks, or even like levered positions, 200% stocks, 300% stocks are optimal given a certain objective. But if that's psychologically not kind of sustainable for an individual, then it may actually be the wrong asset allocation for them. And so I remember, when I was a young and poorer person, where, I would lose like $2,000 in the stock market. I was like, oh my gosh, that's like an enormous sum of money. And I felt terrible. And if I'd taken the long view, it's like, well, like actually $2,000 is a pretty trivial sum relative to your lifetime earnings and all the economic resources you'll have over your lifetime. that wasn't really a perspective that came naturally to me as a younger, more naive person, somewhat more naive person. Uh, and so I think that if you have these, what seem to be quite risky positions in your financial portfolio, and you engage in what we in behavioral economics call narrow framing, where
Right.
you are just fixated on your financial portfolio and you forget about all the human capital that you have in the background, then you might panic and you might not be able to follow through on the strategy that you thought so confidently you could follow through on back when stocks were rising all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a great insight. I mean, one thing I'm trying to, grapple with from that insight is, okay, does that mean we can never, we have to have some experience with different market cycles before we can have some assessment of our risk preference? I mean, does that mean, I mean, and that makes sense in some ways, given what we know about people's inability to forecast their future emotions. Is that a takeaway that you would make from what the finance gurus are saying there?
It could be, although I think as an educator, I have this optimistic view that maybe we can help people think their way through these problems and solve them. And so, was it Nietzsche that said that a man can endure any what if he has a how or a why? Yeah, I think it was if he has a endure any what if he has a why.
Okay.
And so, if people were really uh, absorbing this lesson that my human capital is my biggest economic asset. And so if I lose 5% of my financial portfolio value, it's not devastating because I have all these wages coming to me in the future. Then, they might be able to overcome their fear and recognize that this seemingly risky asset allocation, the financial portfolio, is not actually that risky. And so they can feel okay about occasional losses.
Okay. All right. So here's, a couple more questions here. So one is like, one thing I don't know, and if you don't know this, that's okay too, but who reads the popular finance books? Does that cut across the income spectrum, or is it more focused on this sort of aspirational segment, I'll say? And, along those lines, do the gaps that you uncover apply just to the readers, or do they also apply to some of the clients that are more in the sort of ecosystem, the wheelhouse of financial advisors, which typically tends to be more of the sort of mass affluent all the way up to affluent? And again, if you haven't dug into that, no problem. But I thought maybe that would be something that we could sort of drill down on.
So I don't know the readership statistics themselves, but certainly if you look at the content of the books, you can see that some of those, actually many of the books are clearly geared in part to people who are really struggling financially.
Yep.
So it's kind of here's your 8-step program. And
Right.
step
Right.
one is pay off your credit card debt. Step two, build an emergency savings fund. And
Yeah.
these are not the segment of people that would be able to pay for a financial advisor or that a financial
Sure.
advisor would even take
Makes
on.
sense. Yep.
And so I think there is that kind of aspirational set. And then there's another set of people that just want to invest better. And so these are probably people that have some non-trivial level of assets.
Mm-hmm.
You can think about kind of the Benjamin Graham,
Sure.
value investing books, or there are actually some books that get into, I wouldn't call it mathematical, but it's like, let's say, kind of mathematical adjacent exposition. So I think that there is kind of a spectrum of who these books are targeting.
So, James, what in doing this project, I'm curious if there's any if there's one or many big unanswered questions for you. Like if someone were to write the ideal personal finance book informed by behavioral economics, and maybe that'll be you. I don't know. What would it?
I would like to have written such a book. But to write such a book seems daunting. Huckleberry Finn said, if I'd known what a pain it was to write a book, I would have never done it.
I love that. Some people want to write a book and some people want to have written a book. So I think this is the right attitude there. I mean, what do you think? How would it differ, and what might it struggle to still get right?
I think that housing is a big mystery still.
Okay.
for both kind of academics and practitioners. The risks of housing are poorly understood. The way that housing should affect your asset allocation, poorly understood. I don't think there are great models of how that's done. I was just talking to a real estate professor at Wharton, very senior, well-respected figure in the field, and I asked him, so like, how does the fact that you own a house, how does that affect your asset allocation, or do you just basically ignore your house when doing your asset allocation? He said, yeah, I ignore my house. Says, wow, like, if
Great.
this guy is ignoring his house, which is only probably like the biggest asset in his portfolio, in doing his asset allocation, then what hope is there for the rest of us?
Yeah,
So I think
seriously.
this question of like, how should my house affect my asset allocation? Huge unanswered question. Another huge unanswered question from the perspective of academic theory is, I have this mortgage outstanding. I have some extra cash sitting around. Should I pay down my mortgage more quickly, or should I invest that cash, say, in the stock market?
Right.
It's only
Right.
like, one of the biggest questions that, the biggest stakes questions in personal financial management that
Yeah.
people routinely face. We basically have no answer to that question.
Yeah. 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 That's great. All right. Final question for you, James. So imagine an advisor comes up to you and says, all right, after this conversation, you've done all this work. What's the one mistake I'm probably still making with my clients? Or just making, not still. What would you tell them?
Well, I mean, I think kind of not being aggressive enough in
Okay.
gas allocation, I think would be kind of at the top of my list. And then second, it would be believing that past performance of active investment managers or fund managers is actually predictive of future fund performance. I actually have a paper showing that you do that kind of a simple strategy of picking the best recent performers versus picking the worst recent performers. They perform about the same going forward.
Fantastic. James, thank you so much for the work you've done and for being on the show today. I really appreciate your insights.
Pleasure to be here.